Thank you, Donato, for those powerful words. We're very blessed to have you with us, as always. And thank you all for coming to Nashville for this year's Connectivity Summit. My name is Ara Yerganian. I'm the company's Chief Brand and Experience Officer, and I'm thrilled to be with you all for the next couple of days. I'm delighted to welcome to this year's Connectivity Summit someone who you're all very familiar with. She's an award-winning journalist, Stand Up to Cancer co-founder, and New York Times best-selling author. She's also a loving mother of 2 accomplished young daughters, an advocate for cancer patients, and a truly compassionate person. She joined CBS as the first woman to solo anchor an evening newscast after a 15-year run as the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. She's interviewed distinguished individuals such as former President Barack Obama, former President George W. Bush, John F. Kennedy Jr., Senator John Edwards, airline pilot Sully Sullenberger, and who cannot forget the interview with Sarah Palin, among other notable interviews. She was also the first network news anchor to report from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, following the devastating earthquakes. Covered the 2011 Egyptian revolution in Cairo, as well as countless other significant news stories. She has recently established her own independent media group and is actively involved in developing and producing a range of projects. Her female-driven company is also working with brands that are aligned with its goal of creating premium content about socially relevant issues. Her documentaries include America Inside Out, a 6-part series for National Geographic, Gender Revolution for National Geographic as well, Under the Gun, which aired on Epix, and Fed Up, available on iTunes, Amazon, and YouTube. Her numerous accomplishments include many esteemed journalism awards, including the DuPont Columbia University Award, a Peabody Award, 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards, a Walter Cronkite Award, and multiple Emmys for broadcast television journalism. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Katie Couric. You're welcome.
So embarrassing. That was so long. I'm so sorry. Ara read it just like I wrote it, though, so thank you, Ara. Hi, Donato.
Katie, am I on?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think so.
Katie, thank you very, very much for being here today.
No, it's great to be here. I'm so admire deeply your passion and your commitment to so many different issues. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of it, and I'm very excited to hear from many of the experts that have gathered at this summit. So thank you for including me, inviting me. I'm here with my colleague, Nick Sweeney, and he's an amazing filmmaker, and we're exploring the idea of doing a documentary on loneliness and social isolation affecting, I'd like a copy of that speech, by the way, Donato, affecting so many people in this country, and really, I think, an issue that touches on so many different areas of our lives and technology and community. So I'm looking forward to the next 2 days.
So Katie, I would be somewhat shying away from my commitment to asking this question. Have you ever felt lonely?
Have I ever felt lonely? Of course. Who hasn't? I think people who don't raise their hands aren't necessarily being honest. I think it's so great that you're encouraging people to be vulnerable. I was very moved by your own vulnerability. By the way, I'd like to volunteer to go with you to your next high school reunion. So we can really rub it into those jerks. I don't know about your high school people, but I hate them. Really. But anyway, of course I've been lonely. You know, I lost my husband when I was 41, and he was 42 to colon cancer. Our daughters were 6 and 2 at the time. I felt profound sadness, grief, and yes, loneliness. I've felt lonely throughout my life, throughout my career. I've had lonely experiences professionally. You know, I think it depends on how you define loneliness exactly, but and the difference between being lonely and being alone, but I think certainly I have felt lonely multiple times, many, many times, probably almost on a regular basis, if I had to be honest.
And I need to kind of turn this back to you. You did something very, very inspirational many years ago when you did the colonoscopy through a video, and you were able to inspire so many individuals to understand what was behind the procedure and what it meant in terms of diagnosing this earlier. And what we're learning with this whole loneliness and being alone is that we need to get it out there, and we need to talk about it. And as you have traveled, what would you offer this audience? Because I think everybody's thinking that, you know, we have to innovate the next big solution, and I'm not so sure that that's true. And so what would you recommend as we begin to think through this for the next 2 days? How do we make it safe? How do we, you know, do what you did many years ago to demonstrate that it's okay? And I know when I released my book, what I really learned about the book was that it was more about storytelling. Mm-hmm. That I was receiving emails from individuals who wrote to me and said, "Thank you for sharing your story because I feel now that I can share mine."
Right.
So what guidance would you provide to this group of 200?
Well, I think, speaking of my own situation, you know, when my husband was diagnosed, when Jay was diagnosed with colon cancer, you know, people really didn't talk about that particular disease. Many of us will remember when President Ronald Reagan was diagnosed with polyps, and that, you know, people talked about that on the news, but very few people talked about colons. I thought it was interesting in The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a Pulitzer Prize-winning book by Siddhartha Mukherjee on the history of cancer. He talked about in the 50s when people wanted to form a support group for women with breast cancer. The word breast had never been used in the New York Times. Some people are nodding. I think they must have read the book. And they had to put in the classifieds an ad asking for women who were suffering from cancer of the chest cavity. So, you know, obviously things changed dramatically in the latter part of the 20th century as breast cancer and breast cancer advocates started their own community and their own activism. But colon cancer really hadn't. And I had this built-in bully pulpit, and I knew that 90% of all colon cancer cases can be cured if they're detected early. And I felt that I had an obligation to the viewers on the Today Show, millions of people, to educate them in a way that I wished I had been educated. You know, Jay was too young to be at the baseline, to get a baseline colonoscopy because he was diagnosed at 41, but I would have been better, you know, more aware of the symptoms, et cetera. So I think just breaking taboos, I mean, the things that you're doing, Donato, when you ask people to raise their hands, I'm not surprised, though, the people at the Milken Summit didn't raise their hands, by the way, but that's a whole nother Oprah. You know, I think that really just starting a conversation, and I think so many of your points I agreed with, not just outlining the problem and explaining the problem, but really coming up with real-world solutions so people won't feel lonelier hearing about loneliness. So, you know, one of the things I feel very much in agreement with you about the power of storytelling. You know, that's what I've done my entire career, to tell stories of people, to get people to care about issues by really finding the best characters to illustrate an issue and somehow tell the story in a way that forms an emotional connection with the viewer so they can feel something. You know, I think in this age of technology and this ubiquitous, you know, connectivity, as you say, and having our cell phones. And, you know, I actually had to stop myself. I just landed in Nashville today. I love Nashville. I've been here a few times. My first college boyfriend was from Nashville. And my mom was so cute. It reminded me, they invited me to come for spring break to Nashville. And the nicest family. And my mom said, you cannot go see that boy's family until his mother writes me a note inviting you. You know, she was so old-fashioned, and which I actually really appreciate, and I wish there was more of that today. But anyway, where was I? I was talking about connectivity. And I think people want to have an emotional connection, and they're craving it. Not only is it absolutely imperative to deal with loneliness, but they want to feel something. And so I guess, you know, I'm not the world's expert on this by any stretch or how to even broach the topic, but I think step one is talking about it, and step two is giving people hope in these very depressing, divisive times. I mean, I just can't even believe the world we're in right now, in terms of the political rancor on both sides, by the way, and the hatred and the nastiness. Nick and I were talking about cancel culture, how the judgment that, you know, people can't make any kind of mistakes. They get canceled out of the world. I mean, it's a very upsetting, depressing, distressing time. And I think people are craving, I think people are inherently good. You know, I'm still a Pollyanna after all these years, and maybe I'm naive, but I really believe in the inherent goodness of human beings. And I think most people are. There are a lot of bad apples, of course, but I really think that most of us are reasonable people who want to come up with solutions, who are just so fed up with the nastiness and the hate that seems to be so prevalent in today's society.
That leads me to a question. I was asked a question a few months ago by a news reporter. I'm not going to tell you my answer.
By what?
By a news reporter.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to ask you the question. I'm not going to tell you my answer until you answer it. But they asked me this question. What are you most afraid?
What are you most afraid of?
No, what are you most afraid will not be here 10 years from now?
The planet. You know, it was so depressing. I talked to my 20... You know, it's really, really scary. I talked to my 23-year-old daughter, who's so amazing. Of course, I would say that. I have a 28-year-old and a 23-year-old. And Carrie, they're both amazing. And Carrie went to Stanford and just finished getting her master's in journalism at Columbia. Bless her heart. Good luck to her, right? And she called me and she said, I am so upset and so depressed. I don't want to have children. And I said, Carrie, don't say that. She said, I don't want to necessarily bring children into this world we're in right now. And I don't know if you've heard that from any of your children or any of your friends' children, but it was one of the saddest things I ever heard. And I said, Carrie, you know, she just feels it so profoundly, the discord and, you know, I think she thinks about climate change a lot, as we all do, and thinks about relationships and the fighting. So I think I also am afraid about community, you know, to bring it back to loneliness. What was your answer, Donato, as I'm going on and on?
It was compassion.
Compassion.
I'm afraid that we moved from the post-9/11 era, where I think there was a lot of compassion.
Where you have an incredible story, by the way, about that, which you maybe can share in a minute after you're finished answering this question. I used to be a good interviewer.
You still are. But I feel like we've lost that sense of compassion. You mentioned a very important variable about hope. A few months ago, I was at a high school in Maine, and I had asked the high school students, they were seniors, what they were most afraid for themselves. And they said they have lost hope. And these are young seniors. And I started to probe deeper in terms of what that meant, but you travel around the world. Is hope gone, or what can we do to reignite this sense that the future can be better for us?
Well, I think that hope is bubbling up from the ground floor. I think hope is happening at a grassroots level. I think as we've lost faith in institutions like the government and politicians and sadly the media, which I think is unfair and in some cases legitimate, but overall unfair because I think they serve such a critically important role. But as we're losing faith in these big institutions, even you might even say in medicine in a way, because now people want to be their best advocates when it comes to getting the best care. And, they no longer think their doctors are gods. Yeah. And I think as a result, people of that lost faith, people are instead going into their communities and saying, where can we change things in our own backyards? We can't wait for the government to fix all our problems. We need to actually step up and create solutions ourselves. So I find that to be an incredibly important development, and it fills me with hope. When I see someone like Shannon Watts start Moms Demand Action after Newtown, Connecticut, after that terrible, horrifying shooting in Sandy Hook, which I covered and have gotten to know some of the parents well. The fact that the federal government could do nothing after those innocent 6-year-old children were mowed down by a crazed gunman. Shannon Watts has started Moms Demand Action through a Facebook group. It's now this huge organization that's changing laws state by state. So when I see things like that happening and people saying, you know what, I'm going to do something about it, I am incredibly heartened. Right?
It's so interesting is that I just shared that recently with someone. I think we're all looking for that one person, but I think it's going to be us.
Right.
I think it's going to be the movement. So you mentioned about 9/11. I'm going to reverse it into a question, if I may. And so, what happened to me on September 11th with my friends who lost their lives. I was supposed to be on the plane, and
but does the audience know about this?
I think most do. So I was, the company that I had started in the late 90s was a company in California. And I was traveling back and forth from Boston to LA. And the weekend of September 10th, my friends, my two friends and their 3-year-old, had traveled from LA to Rhode Island and went up to Maine to visit me, and they were with me for the entire weekend. I was supposed to go out on September 11th with them, but I woke up on Monday, September 10th with a toothache, and I was speaking at a healthcare conference that week, and I said, there's no way that I'm going to be able to speak with a toothache. So I called my friends and said, let's all go out the night of September 10th. And they said, absolutely not. We changed our flight. They were originally supposed to go out that day, and they changed it to the 11th to go out with me, and they said, we're not changing it again, we changed it once. Well, long and short, I went out the night of September 10th, and they boarded the plane on September 11th and lost their lives when the second plane hit the South Tower. And my question to you is that event helped me to discover my personal why. I think up to that point, my professional why was defined, but I don't think my personal why was defined. And in the last 18 years, we have started several not-for-profit organizations, and it made me realize that I could be angry and have bitterness in my heart, or I could move forward and make the world a more just and fair place. And that's what I opted to do, and I like to think that we've made a difference. You've also had, and that's why I titled the book Life's Bulldozer Moments. You've had some bulldozer moments, and what is your why? What is Katie's why in life?
Why I what? Sorry. Help me out, Donato.
Why do you have a great passion and compassion, and I always say nobody cares what you do until they know why you do it. And so what triggered you to take on so many of these social causes, and you've done a lot to make this world a better place. And I think the audience would be interested. What was it that triggered your why?
Well, I think part of it was by choice, and part of it was by chance. I think my parents instilled in me, you know, when I took those career aptitude tests when I was in high school, they all said that I should be a social worker. And I think I've always cared about people who are less fortunate, who are downtrodden, had fewer opportunities. And so I think I've always had that in me. And when I was growing up, my mom encouraged all of the kids in our family. There were 4 of us. My sister passed away from pancreatic cancer a couple of years after I lost my husband. But, you know, we all worked at a camp for blind kids in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Arlington. And during those formative years, I think it made me feel a responsibility to help other people. And I've just always been oriented that way. I was president of a club called Western State in high school, and we'd visit a mental hospital, and we'd actually visit the seniors there and spend the day and bring baked goods, and I'd play the piano, and we'd play bingo. I like service. I like serving other people. And I think that for me, journalism is a way it's actually in some ways a public service, because it can enlighten people, it can motivate them, it can improve their lives individually, it can hopefully improve society in some way. So I think I find service really gratifying, and I guess that's my why.
Everyone knows your story because you're a public figure. Is there any part of your story that you would like to expand on with the audience? Is there any part that you would say, gosh, you know what? I think you should know this part about me.
Well, I'm writing a book right now, so I think I'm going to have everyone wait and buy the book.
Smart.
But it's been fun, you know. One thing, you know, it's been actually very emotional. Of course, I'm a terrible pack rat, and I've just kept everything. You know, in this digital age, I don't know what people are going to do, because, you know, I was born in 1957, so the digital age came later in my life. But, you know, I went through a whole book of letters that were written both to Jay when he was diagnosed with colon cancer, and then to me. And actually at his funeral, I asked people to write Ellie and Carrie letters about Jay, so that when they grew up and got older and wanted to understand who he was and what he was about, they would have this treasure trove of correspondence. And it just struck me, again, how kind people are and how caring and loving. And I think if we appeal to people's better angels, they really do rise to the occasion. And, you know, it's just been really interesting for me to walk down memory lane, both professionally and personally, through going through these boxes of memorabilia, some from when I was a little girl. I kept things. I kept my piano pins when I won the prize at the piano recital, and, you know, my diary when I was 10 years old, when my first reporting. And so it's just been really, really interesting.
One last question, and I do want to open it up to the audience. This week is a lot about demystifying social determinants of health. What does that mean to you when you hear social determinants of health and its implication on loneliness and isolation? What is that mean?
I think for me as a journalist, social determinant is a lack of awareness. You know, I think also it's very difficult. I've seen journalism change so much since I've started in the business. It's so fragmented, and it's so, I think a lot of journalists, people have lost faith in the credibility and accuracy of some of the things they read and consume. And I think this lack of education, awareness, access to information is, I think, a really big determinant. So, and I think, you know, all that is associated with a lack of education, opportunities, access to the best health care. You know, we live in such an unfair system where people of means can afford a certain kind of health care, and people who do not have the means are just out of luck. You know, cancer in many ways is the great equalizer. No matter how much access you have and how many contacts or how much money you have, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter at all. But certainly there have been a lot of positive outcomes for people who do have the means to get really great medical care. And so I think all the things that you believe are obstacles to living a good, healthy life. And as Ara was saying, it's determined by your zip code, not your genetic code. And I feel so lucky, and you know, I had incredibly loving parents. I just had everything going for me when I was a little girl, who encouraged me. I had a good school. It was a public school. I had great public schools that I went to. I went to the University of Virginia. My dad said I could go anywhere. I got into Vanderbilt, but I didn't go, sorry. Because UVA was so much cheaper, and I was like, it's a state school, and it's, I think, just as good at, not better than Vanderbilt. Sorry, Vandy people. Oh, look. So I just think that some people just, you know, life is not fair. And I think anyone with compassion or empathy wants to do everything they can to at least try to even the playing field when they can, where they can.
I'll tell you, Katie, before I open it up to questions, if I just may comment, having you and hearing your words, and I think all of us feel this way, it really does reveal what we need back in the news, what we need back in terms of our society. I just want to thank you for what you have done to make the world a more just and fair place.
Thank you,
Thank
Donato.
you.
That's so nice. Thank
Do
you.
we have a floating microphone? Okay, perfect. So here's your chance to ask some questions.
Vanderbilt people.
Oh, one over here.
Trevor Sprague from Ashtabula, Ohio. In Donato's book, he mentions the pharmaceutical companies and maybe focusing too much on profits rather than the fact that they can create life-saving medications. Some of them lost some focus. I've felt recently that with a 24-hour news cycle, that the news has been focused sometimes more on ratings and not information and accountability. I'm just wondering if you agree with that, and why, and what can we do to maybe shift it back to the real reason that we need the media?
Yeah. Well, that's an important question and a hard question to answer. But, you know, the media has become so bifurcated with people having either on the left or the right. I think executives have made, in some ways, a conscious decision as an audience shrinks and viewership declines. How do you hold on to a passionate base of viewers? And as my friend Nicole says, people often are turning on the news to get affirmation instead of information. And I think that, you know, ratings and profits have always been important. It's a business like anything else. It's the news business. But I do feel that opinion has kind of permeated the news industry, when I think sometimes people want to know facts and they want to know what happened and they want to be respected to form their own opinions. But it's just a very different world, I think partially because of the financial pressures of a declining industry. And, I think PBS is still pretty straight. I think the New York Times, although left-leaning for sure, does some fantastic reporting. The Washington Post, somebody was reading the Wall Street Journal on the plane, and I wanted to grab it because it had so many good articles in it. So there's still a lot of really fine journalism going on. I think that I don't know how to bring it back. I think it's partially determined by what's going on politically now. It's very, very hard. I sometimes wonder what journalism would look like if Mitt Romney were president, or someone who didn't kind of stretch the boundaries of decency on such a regular basis. I think that I don't know what needs to happen to change it, but I think it's a problem because I think it's undermined credibility on the part of news consumers. And as I said, I think the press has such a critically important role to play in a democracy.
We have time for one more? Okay. My friend from Buffalo.
Hi, my name is Tom, formerly from Buffalo, now from Livingston, Tennessee. I see in your notes that people who are lonely are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's. Now, I also know as an Alzheimer's ambassador that 1 in 3 of us who are age 65 today will die from Alzheimer's or related dementias. Now, how can we in our communities connect with the people who need to know about this type of illness? And I think, to frame that answer, I think we need to get the attention of people in their 40s and 50s who are the caregivers and potential caregivers. Thank you.
Is that for Katie or for me?
It's for both of you.
Yep. Yep. I said this to Senator Frist in the room. Okay, he may be out of the room, but he asked me almost a very similar question. How do we get this information out there? And I have to say to you, I think for many years we've looked at health insurance plans kind of as the enemy, and I don't believe that that's the case today. I think that what organizations like Humana and Aetna, what they are doing to address social determinants of health, to get in earlier, to educate the members about the need to stay healthy and the need to address their chronic conditions earlier, I really do think that there is a significant movement where we're recognizing that health plans can be physicians can be an enormous, conduit. You all can. And I like what you said, Katie, is I think we no longer can rely on one institution. I think it's got to be a collection. That's what I meant about collaborative IQ, that the higher our collaborative IQ, the more we can get done. And so I think it's a responsibility for all of us to work together and get the information out there.
I see a lot more collaboration. I started Stand Up to Cancer 10 years ago, and we have 100, I think, scientists, 1,600 scientists from 180 institutions that are involved in 180 different clinical trials. We've contributed to 5 new FDA-approved drugs for various cancers. And I'm seeing a trend across the country where there is increasingly collaboration. People are feeling like, at some point we have to stop competing and collaborate for the common good. And there are politics everywhere in cancer research and television news. You can't get away from it. But I think people are putting aside their politics, and I don't mean politics in that sense of the word, but office politics or industry politics or organizational politics, to come together and come up with some better solutions, which I think is really exciting. And I just wanted to add one thing, Donato, to your point. You mentioned insurance companies. My media company that I just started about a year ago, we're working with brands and companies, purpose-driven brands that care about more than just the bottom line. Of course, they have to make smart business decisions for their shareholders, but they want to stand for something beyond making money. And you're seeing this everywhere. According to this Edelman Trust Barometer, 78% of employees expect their companies and their CEOs to take positions on important social issues. And so I think ironically, if you grew up in my era, we're looking at big business, which was such a dirty word before. You're looking at big corporations and companies like Procter & Gamble and Tivity Health and all sorts of places to say, you know what? We're going to help initiate a conversation. Procter & Gamble has been incredible. I mean, this company in Cincinnati, it's ancient, right? Ivory Soap, they're talking about race relations. They're talking about gender equality. They're talking about all these issues to inform people and illuminate these issues so people can change their lives for the better and change the country collectively. So I think it's a really interesting trend. We're working with Rally Health to give consumers the information they need about Alzheimer's, about what they need to know. So I think we have to, just as technology has changed things so much, and mass media is now an oxymoron. There is not such a thing as mass media, where everybody gathers around the television at 6:30 to watch Walter Cronkite to deliver the news. It just doesn't happen anymore. So you have to look for other entry points to reach people, Facebook groups, and if something doesn't exist, you have to create it. So I think you just have to challenge yourself to be imaginative and creative and say, how can we actually address an issue? How can we reach people where they are, because they're not coming to you anymore? And then how can we, in aggregate, get those number of people we're reaching up?
If I may just summarize this, a few years ago I introduced a word at a Harvard panel, and I'll introduce it here today. What we need to do is have more collaboration. Collaborate and innovate. Collaboration is you're going to work with one another, but you may not have the best idea. If somebody else has the idea, don't be shy or be upset to collaborate with that individual. Katie, you are terrific.
Oh, thank you, Donato. Thank you so much.